Well, I also feel like this is one of those scenarios. Finally, all the fantasy analysts, they all come together around something like this, and then it goes wrong. It's going to be a dud.
No, yeah. You literally cannot show me a lineup this week where Chase Brown should not be starting.
But I mean, are you really telling me, Ian, if you had to choose week in and week out, which guy you're going to start between Gibbs and Montgomery, and you had to make that decision every week, you're going to pick Monty?
One guy's getting twice as many touches as the other guys, Dwayne. That's all I'm saying.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 14 Fantasy Life Ranking Show. I'm Matthew Freedman, Matt F. the Oracle, and I'm here with the boys, Ian Hartitz and Dwain McFarland. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the risers, the fallers, the sicko starts, and at the end of the show, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the rankings and discuss some players where we have some internal disagreement. Ian, it is Week 14, the final week of the regular season for most fantasy leagues. Game time, go time. No excuses. Play like a champion. 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and of course, a great day to be great. Ian, how are you doing?
Ready to run through a brick wall, Freedman. Looking forward to you hosting, man. It's like, we're moving our wide receiver one into the flex spot for, just maybe trying to get a spark out here. So let's go, man. You said it. Great day to be great.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit more like a team using Taysom Hill at quarterback all the time instead of moving him around the field. We'll see how this goes. We will see. Dwain, you and Ian have a number of fantasy teams together. It's the all-important Week 14. How are these teams looking right now?
They're doing pretty good, like the teams that got in. We wanted to get more of them in, but the ones that made it in, like we got 2 over at the FFPC. One of them won last weekend, so it made it through to the next round. I had another one that I did on my own that made it through. And then over at Real Time Sports, thanks for that partnership, guys. How many did we get through, Ian? 3? We got 3 and 2 of them won, I think. So, yeah. We'll see how this week shakes out, Freedman. Buy-Mageddon is here. Not going to lie. Joe Mixon was a common denominator on all those teams. Joe Mixon is on 5 of 6 teams, I think, that we got through, and he's on bye. So you can see Joe Mixon was really important. If you drafted him this year in fantasy football, you probably were doing really good in your league, or at least that's the way it worked out for Mr. Hartitz and I.
All right, so Joe Mixon is out. Another guy who is out, quarterback Trevor Lawrence, on injured reserve with a concussion. And then, of course, NFL Network's Ian Rappaport has reported that Trevor Lawrence is expected to undergo season-ending shoulder surgery. So not just the concussion, also dealing with the injury to the shoulder. And I guess that means Mac Jones time. It should be the guy in Jacksonville for the rest of the season. Ian, I want to start with you. Thoughts on Lawrence for the next season, the future with Lawrence, and then also Mac Jones. Is there any enthusiasm for him and what he brings for this offense in Jacksonville?
On the Mac Jones things, I think we can just say a quick no. But, with Trevor Lawrence over here, the left shoulder, I do think it's better. We're not necessarily dealing with an issue maybe, like a Deshaun Watson has had or anyone else where it's your throwing shoulder where we have to worry about, again, your arm strength just being zapped all of a sudden. So with T-Law, I just think it comes down to, can we finally get this guy a halfway decent supporting cast and, assumingly a new play caller as well. So kudos to Doug Peterson. He certainly has won more Super Bowls than any of us sitting here right now, but certainly does seem like it is time for a change. So, hey, Ben Johnson, Bill Belichick, we'll see what happens here. As we saw with Justin Herbert, man, like as soon as you do start adding that winning culture, answers a lot of questions about, the believed to be struggling quarterback. So I have had my, supporting cast, rankings I put together over the years where, again, just PFF rushing, receiving, pass blocking, run blocking grades, everything except passing. And to no one's surprise, Jaguars perennially in the top 5 since getting T-Law. So Dwayne, situation where I know you feel a little bit lower maybe about T-Law than I do, but I think we can agree that hasn't exactly been, surrounded by diamonds during his time in Jacksonville.
Well, Trevor Lawrence has been good enough to support some fantasy production, which is ultimately that's what this show's about, fantasy. So that's nice. We're not going to have that with Mac Jones, most likely. I will say Mac Jones, with a lesser supporting cast than even what T-Law had, probably, had some similar games. Not probably, did have some similar games to what Trevor Lawrence had early in his career. So it's a never say never kind of situation. Could Mac Jones suddenly turn it around? Hasn't been good so far. 111 yards in his first start. Not ideal, then 138 against the Lions. Last week, played 70% of the snaps, had 235, so a little bit more encouraging. As far as Trevor Lawrence goes, I do think he has the weapons now. Like, I think Evan Ingram's fine. Like, he's probably a top 6-7 tight end in the NFL. You got Brian Thomas Jr. now. That's definitely a very bright spot. Christian Kirk as a slot wide receiver. That's one of the better slot wide receivers in the NFL. Miscast as being your lead target earner in an offense, but whenever you get to use him as your, say, second or third target, I think that's really nice. So, look, I think the weapons are there. You got to get the offensive line right, but at the same time, at some point, man, Trevor Lawrence, like, you got to show us something. Like, you got to elevate the rest of the team, and we just haven't seen that, at least not consistently. He definitely is a quarterback that's shown flashes. Like, there are moments where you're like, oh, man, like, Trevor Lawrence could be really good, but then there's also these moments where you're like, how does he disappear in this kind of spot in this game? So it's been a real seesaw, up and down, which is what we get with a lot of NFL quarterbacks. I don't see, a caliber of player that, I would be wanting to spend the money the Jaguars spent, but that's just the way the NFL is now. If you've got a quarterback that's, say, top 15 in the league, that's the contract that you're giving them, and they're just constantly one-upping each other.
All right, well, as big of a news item as it is that Trevor Lawrence is on IR, it might not even be the biggest news item. That might be that Giants head coach Brian Daboll has said that Drew Lock is going to start in Week 14. It is a really happy day in the Hartitz household. Ian, is there anything that Lock can do to save Brian Daboll's job or earn the starting job for next year?
You know what? I'm just happy that my man's Drew Lock is out here feeding, Malik Neighbors the amount of targets that a true wide receiver one deserves. So is Drew Lock a good quarterback? No, but is he a more fun, bad quarterback than most? Yes, and that is what I rest my laurels on, Freedman. So to answer your question, hard no.
All right, sticking at quarterback, Baker Mayfield practiced in full on Wednesday. He's banged up, but looks good to go for this week. At running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, seemingly not in the doghouse. Lions head coach Dan Campbell said, quote, "It doesn't matter," when asked if he was concerned about Jahmyr Gibbs' social media posts that showed the team plays. Seemingly good news, but of course, it doesn't matter. Maybe he said that the way that my ex-wife said it, in which case it's not good. Kenneth Walker II, dealing with an ankle calf injury, was limited in Wednesday's practice. These are new injuries for him since last week, but I'm really not worried about his availability this week. Kendre Miller is practicing in full for Week 14, designated to return from IR. Of course, sometimes it takes guys multiple practices, multiple weeks with full practice to return. Maybe that's not the case with Miller because he wasn't significantly injured when he went onto IR in the first place. Raheem Mostert limited in Wednesday's practice. Alexander Mattison also limited in Wednesday's practice. He was limited last week too before being ruled out. So let's see if we can get him with a full practice before projecting him in for this week. Juwan Johnson did not practice on Wednesday with a concussion. That's his second concussion since last year. So need to monitor the injury report to see if he clears the protocol. Also with the Bears, DeAndre Swift did not practice on Wednesday. So the Bears dealing with injury issues to both running backs. The 49ers signed running back Patrick Taylor from their practice squad to the active roster. That makes sense. Both Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason are on IR, so the 49ers need bodies. Breece Hall did not practice on Wednesday with a knee injury. Also didn't practice on Wednesday last week with the knee injury before ultimately suiting up, although interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich was less committal this week. And for Thursday Night Football, Josh Jacobs with the calf injury removed from the injury report. He is good to go against the Lions. Going to the wide receivers, the Jets opened the 21-day practice window for wide receiver Allen Lazard. Former Jets GM Aaron Rodgers should be very pleased with that development. Cokeheads unite. Jalen Coker is practicing in full for Week 14 with the quad injury, also practicing in full. Devontae Smith, good news for the Eagles and for Smith fantasy managers. Not as great of news for A.J. Brown and his fantasy managers. Calvin Austin did not practice on Wednesday with a concussion. Rather, he did practice, but he was limited, so need to monitor that report. Cedric Tillman, also concussion, did not practice on Wednesday. Not a positive sign after he missed last week. The Ravens suspended Deontay Johnson one game for conduct detrimental to the team. Look, when a team picks Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, and Tylan Wallace over you, something is wrong. Ladd McConkey, dealing with knee and shoulder injuries, did practice limitedly on Wednesday. That's great news considering how banged up he seemed exiting last week. Also limited Curtis Samuel, Elijah Moore, Tyler Boyd, and Demarcus Robinson. Keon Coleman, dealing with a wrist injury, has been out for a little bit, was limited in Wednesday's practice. Now, he was limited all of last week before not playing. He seems likelier to play this week, but a full practice would be good to see. Treylon Burks underwent an ACL surgery and will miss the remainder of the 2024 season. We'll see about his availability for 2025. It might not even matter. Who knows? Keenan Allen did not practice on Wednesday. He limped his way through week 14. Monitor the injury report. He could have a good matchup in the slot of 49ers cornerback Diamador Lenore is out again. And then also for the Bears, DJ Moore did not practice on Wednesday with the quad. It seems like general maintenance, but we shall see. Tyreek Hill did not practice on Wednesday with the wrist. It was listed as rest, standard maintenance at this point. Mike Evans, dealing with a hamstring and calf injury, did not practice on Wednesday. The calf injury seems new, but I still wouldn't bet against him playing this week as he tries to hit that 1,000-yard mark for the 11th straight season. Josh Reynolds, formerly of the Broncos, signed to the Jags, and then DK Metcalf, dealing with a shoulder injury, was limited in Wednesday's practice. I think he plays this week. He's been dealing with that injury for a while, but it seems like potentially it is impacting him. And then for Thursday Night Football, Romeo Doubs with the concussion will not play against the Lions, so out for a second straight week. And then to close out with the tight ends, Dalton Kincaid was limited in Wednesday's practice, so this is a step in the right direction after not practicing or playing last week. Dallas Goedert with a knee injury did not practice on Wednesday. He's week to week. He could go on IR. I doubt he plays this week, which makes Grant Calcaterra a potential flyer in skank leagues. And then, of course, correspondingly, the Eagles signed CJ Uzoma to the active roster. And then Juwan Johnson was limited in Wednesday's practice, monitor, but it looks like maintenance, and he could have an expanded role without Taysom Hill, who, of course, tragically on IR with the ACL tear. Jatavian Sanders is trending towards playing this week, so not great news for anyone hoping for Tommy Trembles to repeat last week's season best performance. Tight end Tommy Trembles, and then Vikings tight end Josh Oliver is dealing with a wrist and an ankle injury, practiced in full for this week. If he returns, slight downgrade to TJ Hawkinson. All right, that was the rapid fire news items. Coming up next, the rankings. But first, a word from our friends at Game Time. Dwain and Ian, we all know that there's nothing like being at a game in person. I'm a Mavs fan, so is Dwain. I live in the Northeast, about 90 minutes outside of Boston, so I'm thinking about going to the Mavs game when they play the Celtics here in February. And of course, Game Time is my go-to for finding amazing tickets for all kinds of events, not just sports. I was scrolling through the Game Time app and I came across this new feature, Game Time Picks. It is a total game changer. It curates your experience so you can see the best deals on great seats. Game Time Picks makes finding tickets so easy. Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time, baby. All right, we are back with the risers and the fallers, presented by DraftKings, and we are looking at the top 12 quarterbacks we have in our consensus rankings. Number 1, Jalen Hurts. Number 2, Josh Allen. Look, Allen, MVP consensus. I'm just going to say maybe there should be a little bit more love, a little more conversation for Jalen Hurts in the MVP conversation. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Number 3, Joe Burrow. Number 4, Baker Mayfield. 5, Kyler Murray. 6, Sam Darnold. Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Tua, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and Justin Herbert round out the second half of the top 12. It is a Bimageddon situation. And so some of the usual names, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, even Bo Nix at this point, those guys are missing. But this is the top 12. This is what we have. And we're going to start by looking at one of the QB risers, our guy in the number 9 spot, Tua Tagovailoa, who has a matchup this week with the Jets. Now, normally, we would think of this as historically a pretty tough matchup, but of course, the Jets no longer what they used to be. Things seem to be going better for the Dolphins. The Dolphins at home in this spot. Dwain, going to kick it to you. What is it that you like about Tua this week?
Well, first of all, I just have to say it's a really weird week at the quarterback position, period, right? We've got the bye weeks that you already talked about. And typically, whenever I write up, the column looking at the rankings, risers and fallers, the number one thing we care about, is their fantasy production already, right? And so you're still going to get that. But then the tiebreakers really go to how do these matchups, right? And what are we seeing from the odds makers in Vegas? And those things start to kind of bend and, mold our rankings as we push guys up and down. And this week, whenever I opened it up for quarterbacks, and that's where I always start because everything flows through the quarterback, right, Freedman? And I'm like, okay, there are not any good quarterbacks that are getting the good matchups this week. Will Levis has a great one. We'll talk about him more later. He's the guy that gets the Jaguars. We've got Aiden O'Connell getting the Buccaneers. You got Cooper Rush getting the Bengals. So all of these teams, if you open up our DVP tool and you look at the boost given to quarterbacks at the fantasy, for fantasy points, it's all going to guys that normally wouldn't be anywhere near our top 12. So we'll talk about how much some of those guys moved up later. There is one slam dunk. It's Joe Burrow against the Cowboys. That's a plus 4.7, based on fantasy boost. But you guys are starting Joe Burrow. So I'm not going to write about Joe Burrow. He's an awesome player. He's going to throw for 400 yards and probably 5 touchdowns against our Cowboys this weekend. You don't need me to tell you that. So a lot of it this week, Freedman, just really came down to how these players have been playing in recent weeks. Okay, so with all that in mind, like for Tua, it's pretty simple. First of all, he's been a high-end QB2 performer for his time that we've had Mike McDaniel in town. He's averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game, 37 starts with Mr. McDaniel. So he's a high-end QB2. We've got all these quarterbacks on bye. That naturally moves him into the QB1 conversation just alone. Second, he's been hot over these last few weeks. We've got 323 yards per game with 3 touchdowns per game over his last 3 starts. Now, those sort of things can be fluky. They can come and go. But with Tua, we have seen it over the history of his career with Mike McDaniel. So I think that there's a chance that not that he's going to stay at those levels, but he could stay hot. Now, the big thing really for the Dolphins has been that with defenses trying to take Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle away, they've found their counterpunch with Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane in the passing game. That's what's opened things up. Third, while the Jets are typically a team that we think of as being a tough matchup, and if you look at it on the season, it's still been pretty rough. But over the last 3 games, man, giving up 248 yards per game, they are not what they had been earlier in the season. I think there's a little bit of give up potentially going on. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths, or say that, people aren't are making business decisions, but something's definitely going on with the Jets, not playing at the same level as they were early in the year. So when you put all that together and then finally the odds makers just agree, Freedman. I mean, we've got the Dolphins right now as 7-point favorites. They've got the 6th best team total on the slate at 26.5 points. There's just a lot of things to like about Tua. So I was like, as I kept checking all those things, I just had to keep moving him up. And I do have him the highest in our ranks. I think everyone else is probably saying more of a borderline QB1, like QB10, QB11. I think I am the highest on the staff, having him inside my top 6.
I will say, situationally, outside of the matchup, it's a great spot. Tua tends to play really well at home. He tends to really pile it on, is a big favorite. He's got all of those things going for him. But Ian, I have him QB9. I think you have him QB8. We are a little bit lower. I can see the positive case for him, but there's also a negative case to be made. Where are your thoughts on Tua right now?
I actually think it's a great matchup. And we don't even have to go back to the last 3 weeks. We can go all the way back to week 6. And the only defense allowing a worse mark in EPA per dropback are those Jaguars compared to the Jets. So if you guys want to go ahead and blame Ahmad Gardner's new golf obsession for not being, a sticky number 1 corner anymore, you can do that. I won't. Golf is amazing. Quit blaming him for it, guys. But guess what? He's not playing as good at football this year. And accordingly, we have seen offenses have all sorts of success. So I do also subscribe to Dwain's theory that maybe this Jets team doesn't exactly have the most to play for these days. But yeah, on the other side of things, really ever since Tua's came back, we have seen the best version of him. Guys, I mean, he's tied for 4th in passing touchdowns, 2nd in passing yards, number 1 in EPA per dropback, and number 5 in CPOE. I know we can't go, freaking weekend over here on social media without trying to debate Tua versus Justin Herbert. But you know what, Freedman? Starting to think maybe both guys are just pretty damn good at playing quarterback.
Well, speaking of Justin Herbert, there are risers, there are fallers. Herbert, our faller for this week. Dwain, I mean, why do you hate fun? Why do you hate the Los Angeles Chargers? Why do you hate Justin Herbert? Talk to me.
I don't hate Justin Herbert. He's actually playing really well. He is my quarterback on one of my Superflex dynasty teams. So it's like, I like this guy as a talent. I think he's a very good quarterback. There's just enough questions here. It's really, a lot of it comes down to the regression of Quentin Johnston in this offense. Like, we need a second playmaker. Ladd McConkey has been great, but he can't do everything, for this offense in the passing game. You lose J.K. Dobbins. That means you lose the dynamic player in your backfield. Maybe they could get Kamani Vidal a little bit more involved out of the backfield, do some different things there. But Justin Herbert's just challenged right now for playmakers in the passing attack. And then you have the propensity for this team to slow things down, not run enough plays in a game. Now, last week was an outlier. I remember when Ian and I were doing the Sunday night show, we're probably like, what? The Chargers ran like how many plays? Like it was an outlier, weird game against the Falcons. So like we're not expecting that, but it's a pretty slow offense. They don't run a lot of plays, and they have an ability to just shell up because we've got two coaches that want to play the narrow margins. If they can play a defensive game and win by a field goal, they're okay with that if they think that's the best option for their game plan. So just when you kind of put it all together, for me with Justin Herbert, that just leaves some risks. There's still an upside scenario, but he doesn't have the playmakers, right, that a Tua has, where like it's less likely he's going to blow up for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. He could still do it because he's one of the best NFL quarterbacks in the league, but it's just really about the supporting cast. Kansas City hasn't been as good, over these last several weeks on defense, so I'm not saying that they're like this impenetrable force, but also, again, they may be trying to find their counterpunch, right, to the counterpunch that the offenses have given them, that have figured that they've figured out that Spagnuolo defense over the last few weeks. So not so sure, though, that the Chargers are equipped to really, to do the same thing that we've seen some of these other offenses. Although, like it's not like it's been anybody great. It's like the Panthers have done it, the Raiders have done it. So it's not like teams with a ton of weapons have been the ones figuring out the Chiefs. So Herbert, there's just enough questions, Freedman. I had to move him into the QB2 conversation for this week for me. I just think there's other options that I like the ceilings more.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit higher on him than you and Ian. And part of it is by Mageddon. Part of it is, to your point, that the Chiefs haven't been quite as good. And I think I am a little more optimistic about Ladd McConkey being Ladd McConkey this week instead of totally injured. But Ian, there is a case to be made in the other direction. And you are very close to Dwain in the rankings. What is going on with Herbert in terms of why you're a little more pessimistic?
I love me some Ladd McConkey too, but after that, we have nobody. And we even talked during the quote-unquote Quentin Johnston hot stretch about how much of that production was coming off of busted coverages. So good job by him catching that ball. But now it seems like if there's a defensive back in his area code, that man is not going to be able to haul it in. So just problematic again for a quarterback who's already not dealing with the most pass game volume, as Dwain explained, and also not always a good bet to rack up a bunch of yards on the ground. We've seen him do it in spurts, but as we saw last week with just one rushing yard on the ground, not exactly something we can totally hang our hat on. So Chiefs have fallen off a bit. Now, as Dwain said, we do have the Panthers and Raiders matchups. Tougher ones were, on the docket, though, against the Bucs and Bills. Either way, guys, just 29th in EPA per dropback over these past 5 weeks. So still my QB 15, not burying the guy in the ranks or anything like that, but give me Brock Purdy, give me Jameis Winston, Geno Smith, and Russell Wilson ahead of Mr. Herbert this week.
All right, one more guy to talk about at the quarterback position, and that is Will Levis. What a time to be alive. By Mageddon, Will Levis, a sicko start. And look, it's justifiable. I mean, there might be a legit situation where you look at Will Levis, look at Justin Herbert, and think, you know what? I'm going with the guy who can't throw the football. Dwain, talk to me about Will Levis.
Well, Freedman, what's funny is I think you're even higher than me on Will Levis. I did call him out as a sicko start this week. He's only in 7% of Yahoo lineups right now. So this is a true sicko start. No one is starting this player. He's available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. Like this guy's just sitting on your waiver wire. But if you are the manager of, Lamar Jackson, maybe you didn't plan ahead, Jaden Daniels, and you don't have one of these other guys we have ahead of Levis in the ranks, he is a guy that's mostly available. And don't look now, Freedman, but he has been passing the ball okay over the last few games. And I actually went back and watched the film. And, the first thing I noticed, is we're not having as many of the bonehead plays. But still, this is a guy that's kind of got some Jameis Winston to his game. He's going to air it out. He's going to push the ball down the field. And he's been running well over the last 3 games, averaging, since coming back from the injury, 240 yards and 1.8 touchdowns per game over that span. And they've picked it up in the run game. I mean, Freedman, there's something going on here. Like he's got a 19% design rush share, which ranks 3rd in the NFL since his return to the lineup. Now, I went back and when I was watching the film, some of those are fumbled snaps, which turn into rushing attempts, which we'll have to think about in the offseason. Do we somehow disclude aborted snaps from the design rushing attempt plays? Today, that's included in our feed from PFF. So there's a few of those that shouldn't really count towards that 19%. But make no mistake about it, the intent is there to use him more in the design run game. There was a game where 5 of them truly were design rushing plays, not kneel downs, nothing else. So we'll take any little thing we can get. That gives him a chance to score a rushing touchdown as well. But the big thing here, I buried the lead. He's playing the freaking Jaguars. The Jaguars have been the biggest boost in the NFL to the quarterback position. 7 additional points per game for quarterbacks playing this defense. Like that's crazy. That might be a record. I would have to go back and look at our historical data on the DVP, looking at the fantasy boost stuff, but 7 extra points per game to the quarterback position. That is a lot. And that's what Will Levis has coming his direction this weekend. So yes, I upgraded him to mid-range quarterback 2 status, Freedman, but I think you have him like as a borderline QB1.
Like, it's disgusting. All right. I mean, you have him as sicko start. It's by Mageddon. I highlighted him in Freedman's favorites. Week 14, what a time to be alive. I did not think we would be this high on Will Levis, but the matchup and the exigency of having 6 teams on bye, that just speaks to all of this. All right. So that's Will Levis. We have to talk about something else. We need a palate cleanser. Let's move on to running backs. But first, let's talk about our friends at DraftKings.
Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football. You can even get closer to the action with my partners at DraftKings because, guys, right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. That's right. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins after betting just $5. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
All right, we are moving on to the running backs, starting with potential MVP Saquon Barkley at number 1, followed by Alvin Kamara, Chase Brown, Devon Achane, one of my favorites at number 4, Bijan Robinson, and Bucky Irving, all the way up to number 6, but you can't say it's not warranted. Number 7, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams, 8, Breece Hall, 9, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, and Kenneth Walker at 10, 11, and 12. And then in the top 24, David Montgomery playing on Thursday Night Football, James Conner, Tony Pollard, Rico Dowdle. I mean, that is a sign that 6 teams are on bye when Rico Dowdle is at number 16, followed by Aaron Jones, Tyrone Tracy, DeAndre Swift, Rashad White, Najee Harris, Isaac Guerendo. I mean, of course, who had that on their bingo card? Isaac Guerendo at number 22, and then Travis Etienne and Jaylen Warren rounding out the top 24. And let's get to the guy that we have at number 3, one of our risers for the week, Chase Brown, playing on Monday Night Football, going on the road, playing the Cowboys. The Bengals, pretty big favorites, 5.5 points at this point. The Cowboys seemingly winning games, competing in games that they shouldn't be wanting to compete in at this point. The Bengals seem to find ways to lose games that they should win, but Chase Brown getting a full workload, looking like the guy without having to compete with Zach Moss in that backfield. One of the best offenses in the league. Dwain, what do you like about Chase Brown this week?
Well, since the Zach Moss injury, only Alvin Kamara, who's been just fed the ball every week, has a higher utilization score than Chase Brown. And one of the cool things is you guys can go check this out over in the utilization suite of tools over at FantasyLife.com. And we've actually added, thanks to all the feedback from you guys, a slider on that season stats view. So now you can look at any range of weeks that you want. And so for this one, I just went and looked, okay, when did the Zach Moss injury happen? I moved that to week 9. And then through the rest of the season, and I can see, wow, Chase Brown is now number 2 in utilization score over that span. He is also second over that span in fantasy points per game at 22.4, behind only our number 1 guy, which is Saquon Barkley. So you mentioned it, Freedman, great offense, scores a lot of points, a lot of opportunities here, and they're playing against the Cowboys. The Bengals have they're 6-point favorites, so that leans into the run game, even though we know Burrow is going to do his thing, but there could be some additional opportunities here for Chase Brown on the ground. And then if we look at this team total for the Bengals, 28.3, This could be one of those 150 all-purpose yards with 2 touchdowns kind of game for Chase Brown on Monday night. So, yes, he moves to running back 2 for me. But I know someone else here is also really high on Chase Brown, and I think he actually called this out either on Sunday night or on Tuesday on our show. Actually, I think it was Sunday night, Ian, that you called this. Chase Brown, running back 2 overall. As soon as I started looking at it, when I opened everything up this week, I'm like, yep, Chase Brown can only put him behind Saquon Barkley this week.
RB2 overall and the flex player number 3 overall. So Dwain, I know we talk about people, you should start this guy in every lineup, but sometimes we'll see these ridiculous lineups where it's like, okay, fine. No, you literally cannot show me a lineup this week where Chase Brown should not be starting. So get him in there and be happy you have him on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the guys I wrote up in Freedman's favorites this week. You guys touched on all of it, but the utilization, people should go check out the utilization report, which I think is one of the best tools in the industry. And you can, use the sliders to see, okay, what are the games without Zach Moss? And the utilization has been awesome. 83% snap rate, 92% rush share, 64% route rate, 494 yards, 3 touchdowns in his 4 games without Zach Moss. Just absolute full-blown workhorse. And sadly, I feel like he's going to put it to our Cowboys on Monday Night Football. One guy who might not be playing as well this week, Chuba Hubbard, going against the Eagles. This is one of the worst possible spots that you could draw up for any running back. He's got an ascendant player coming behind him who was highly drafted. He's on a team with an underperforming offense. He's on the road. He's a massive underdog, and he's going against a defense that now looks like one of the best in the league. It feels like you say that, and it's like, I can't imagine putting this guy in my lineup this week. But of course, 6 teams on bye, and given what Chuba Hubbard has been able to do to this point in the season, you still might have to start him this week. Dwain, talk about Chuba Hubbard as a faller.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job of summarizing it all there. Do you have my article open, Freedman? Look, he's on the offense that you talked about. It's the Panthers. Nobody wants to be a part of it. Vegas definitely does not like this offense any week, especially this week. They have the lowest team total on the slate. To your point, they're dogs. So is Chuba Hubbard even going to get even if Chuba Hubbard still had the workload he had before, what is that going to mean in this game where they are such heavy underdogs? The other part, to your point, we've got Jonathan Brooks last week took over, almost 30% of the rushing attempts. Is that number going to grow? We don't really know for sure. This thing could even out somewhere like 40% for Jonathan Brooks, 45%. Nobody really knows. Anyone that thinks they can tell you how that's going to look, they're just full of it because we can't read the coaches' minds. And guess what? The coaches aren't going to tell us what they're going to do. So we don't know for sure where this split is going to land. So you really hit on all the key things. And then that final part is just the matchup for even playing against the Eagles. This is the second toughest matchup for running backs in fantasy football. He's coming off of the toughest one against the Chiefs. That did not go well in a game that the Panthers stayed in. So you had a much better game script. I think with this game, they're going to get their wheels blown off. The Eagles might, I know it's a huge line, but this could be a cover. This could be a situation where they cover. Saquon Barkley might have 300 yards in this game, and the Panthers might hold the ball for 25. I know that's way too low. 25 plays. So it's just there's so many things going against Hubbard here, Freedman. So yeah, I'm out. Now, to your point, he's still a low-end running back too because there's 6 teams on bye. But I also have a personal bias against you, Chuba Hubbard. You're the reason that the other team that didn't make it forward last weekend for Mr. Ian Hartitz and I, over in one of our high stakes leagues, you're the reason. You are the sole reason you did not do your part. You did not hold the line, and therefore we don't have a chance to win $1,500 this weekend. So thank you, Chuba Hubbard.
Wow. I don't even know what to say, but at least you got revenge on him by ranking him at RB25 instead of RB24.
Yeah, I just bumped him outside.
just outside the top 24. Tough stuff for my guy there. Ian, it's the situation where you look at the rankings, in most situations, you probably have to start Chuba Hubbard. Most people aren't fortunate enough to have 3 running backs who are better than Chuba Hubbard active this week. At the same time, I just feel so disgusting starting him. I feel like I would maybe be inclined to think about some of these guys further down my rankings and just be like, I know what the rankings say, but screw my rankings. I don't want Chuba Hubbard in my lineup. What are your thoughts on him this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's like that movie, The Perfect Storm, where it's actually not perfect. It's horrific, and it's going to ruin your fantasy team if you start this guy. So, I mean, again, the volume's been down. We only have one reception over these past 2 weeks, and for good reason. Jonathan Brooks looked fantastic with his touches last week. Maybe he's the best running back in Carolina, so we'll see what goes on there. So, again, not loving the volume. Dwayne mentioned the matchup last week, the first time that the Eagles have allowed over 100 yards rushing since before their Week 5 bye. Guys, 241 total yards per game allowed since that Week 5 bye. The next best team has been the Lions at 307. So the Eagles really are playing better than anyone else on that side of the football. And accordingly, the Panthers imply for the fewest points of the week. And then, yeah, we're also dealing with this horrible offense. So, Dwayne, we kind of talk about throughout the offseason, like, all right, just evaluating any sort of, start, sit, or ranking decision. We have a player's talent. And I think we can all agree that Chuba's a, good NFL running back, above good, call him great, whatever. Okay, that's fine. But the volume's not moving in the right direction. The matchup isn't looking good. And his overall team offensive environment not looking good. So we're only checking one of those 4 boxes, man. If you have anything that's a close start sit decision with Chuba and honestly any other Carolina Panther, I'm taking the other guy.
All right, well, looking at a potential close start-sit situation, that brings us to Travis Etienne, our sicko start for the week. And look, I have Chuba at number 22. I have Etienne at number 25, and my gut is flip that. I would rather have Etienne, regardless of what my rankings say. Dwayne, make the case for Etienne going against the Titans this week.
Yeah, he is the sicko start this week. He's only in 37% of lineups. Usually I make the cut line at 30%, but as I looked at the guys below that, this one was close enough. Like, look, Etienne to only be in 37% of league and 37% of starting lineups, given where we drafted this man, this is one of the biggest busts in fantasy football. So, I mean, it's kind of a travesty just period that we're having to talk about him as a sicko start. But the main reason that I moved him here is last week we saw him back in that lead role in week 13 coming out of their bye, which is when we know that coaches can make some of these changes. I question anything Doug Peterson does. But like this one, okay, I kind of understand it. You went back with Mr. Travis Etienne. Tank Bigsby's been very efficient, on the ground. But you would think Etienne gives you that better, potential, passing game, upside, Mr. Freedman. But you know what? Last week, Tank Bigsby had more routes than Travis Etienne. I'm supposed to be making the case for Travis Etienne, not against him. I promise I'll get there, guys. Look, it's this. He did lead the backfield. He had 52% of the rushing attempts, 52% of the snaps. He handled 59% of the team's rushing attempts. I still think over the course of time, he's the guy that's going to get more work on the passing down. So theoretically, he has this upside to be this 3-down player. And we've got a neutral matchup here against the Titans. They've not been, great or bad against the run all season. They've been really good against the pass, but they're more banged up. So I think this is a situation where the matchup doesn't scare me. Not going to probably be a lot of points in this one, Freedman. I mean, you might have something to say. Maybe we're going to somehow hit an over on this one, but we've got a pretty low total on the game. But still, it should be close. That should keep the game script right. Etienne did lead last week coming out of the bye. So, I mean, that's it. I know it's not a super strong case, but I have him also just like you as a borderline running back to this weekend. And I'm kind of with you. It's like, man, maybe I should just flip him with Chuba.
All right. I mean, look, we've talked about bad running backs enough. Let's cleanse the palate a little bit and move on to wide receivers. But first, let's talk a little bit about our friends from New Era. All right, I got my Cowboys hat on from New Era. Honestly, this dope hat might be the best part of being a Cowboys fan, sadly enough. But you should stand for change with the New Era cap, the official cap of the NFL. The Inspired Change collection is part of their commitment with the NFL to break barriers and create opportunities in communities of color. With the black team logo set against official team color crowns and finished with the first ever on-field pin, this collection is for the change makers. Join the movement with the official cap of the NFL, available now at New Era Cap. The NFL does not profit from the sale of Inspired Change products. Charitable contributions are awarded by the NFL Foundation directly to NFL's Inspired Change nonprofit partners. For more information, please visit www.nfl.com/inspiredchange. All right, let's get to those sweet, sweet wide receivers. Jamar Chase at number 1 going against my Cowboys. That is going to be a sad Monday night football game for me indeed. At number 2, Justin Jefferson, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, A.J. Brown, and Mike Evans. And then rounding out the top 12, we have CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, such a boss, again, going to dominate my Cowboys, sadly. And then Drake London, Jakobi Meyers in the top 10. What a time to be alive. And then at number 13, George Pickens, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Ladd McConkey at number 17, followed by Calvin Ridley in a great matchup against the Jags. And then rounding out the top 24, DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Juwan Jennings, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, and Marvin Harrison Jr. All right, let's talk about the wide receiver riser that we have here, who is not in the top 24, but we're looking at Deebo Samuel going against the Bears. No Christian McCaffrey, no Jordan Mason, seemingly no future for the 49ers, but Deebo Samuel going against the Bears. What are your thoughts here on the number 1 wide receiver for the 49ers?
Is he the number 1 wide receiver for the 49ers? Did you see Ian just throw up the quotes? I think that's our question here. But I was totally ready to pounce on the Jakobi Meyers stuff. But we're gonna go with the faller first here. But yeah, whenever we look at Deebo Samuel, that's the big part. Like Juwan Jennings has by far been the highest target earner on the team. I will say over the last 4 weeks, we do have a 27% and a 29% target share mixed in for Deebo. So it's not like he's been completely uninvolved in the offense. But honestly, this is just me giving in, Freedman. I have been hesitant to move Deebo Samuel down the ranks, just thinking maybe it was the pneumonia, just coming up with excuses in my mind. It's still the 49ers. Kyle Shanahan's going to dial up the stuff under the coverage. We're going to get him going. Maybe they'll give him some carries on the ground, which definitely could happen this week with CMC. But at some point, it just becomes a situation where you have to prove it. And Deebo has not proved it in a long time. You have not been happy to have Deebo Samuel in your lineup over the last month. He has been losing you fantasy matchups. So he's got a 4.8 utilization score over the last 4 weeks. That ranks 59th at the wide receiver position. If we look at his fantasy points, not much better, 72nd. Actually worse, 72nd, averaging 7 points per game. So just not a guy that's been coming through. So I just had to move him down to the wide receiver 3 range this week, Freedman, which is low considering to what you've been bringing up. We've got 6 teams already on bye. So that is pretty low. That would put him as a borderline wide receiver 3, maybe a wide receiver 4 in most weeks, which you hate to say it about Deebo Samuel, but that's just where we are right now. Now, I will say, writing this column and putting these players, especially the ones where I finally break and move them down here to the guys that get the downgrade, that often inspires them to have huge games. And then next week we will have them back in the top 24. I'm hoping that that's what I'm doing here with Deebo Samuel Freedman. Matchup also pretty tough with the Chicago Bears. But I'll flip it to Ian because he was ahead of me on the Deebo Samuel downgrade. I got to say, Ian's been on this one for like a month.
I mean, he only has 1 touchdown since week 1, and that was that play against the Seahawks where you can even kind of say it was just a blown coverage by the defender. So I do think, some of the early season injuries, the pneumonia maybe played a part in it, but go ask any 49ers player. It's not like he's been making the most out of his touches for most of the season and just all of a sudden wasn't getting them. 2.9 yards per carry, guys. That's 97th among 102 players with at least 25 rush attempts. So it is weird to me that right when it does seem like he's looking better, I mean, if you've watched any 49ers kick returns over the past couple of weeks, there's a good chance you've seen Deebo breaking one for 50 plus yards, that all of a sudden he's not getting, all these touches on offense. Just 1 rush attempt over these past 3 weeks, hasn't even reached 25 receiving yards. But I think the first thing Dwain brought up is probably the biggest issue here. This isn't the normal 49ers offense. I mean, they drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round. Obviously felt like they needed him. They drafted him in the first round. Comes off from the injury, looks okay enough for 3 games or so. No Brandon Ayuk. Your first round wide receiver has 0 catches over the past 3 games. So it's a broken offense. And unfortunately, we're seeing the stars, even like Deebo, falling off a bit. So Juwan Jennings deserves the benefit of the doubt. I would think that no CMC, maybe you got to start trying to get the ball to Deebo more often. But again, just hasn't earned any level of benefit of the doubt so far this year. So accordingly, guys, yeah, I'm pretty out on Deebo this week.
All right, I accidentally said he was the riser. I would love to be able to blame one of the producers and be like, the outline was wrong. I just misread it. Our faller for the week is Deebo Samuel. Our riser is Jakobi Meyers, who is like firmly in that wide receiver one borderline conversation. Dwain, talk to me about Jakobi Meyers.
Well, I also feel like this is one of those scenarios, and Ian, you've brought this up on Twitter before, where finally all the fantasy analysts, they all come together around something like this, and then it goes wrong. It's going to be a dud. But Jakobi Meyers, man, look, you can't, if it happens, it's just going to be variance. If Jakobi Meyers, is a dud this weekend, all the underlying data says, we should be in store for something really sweet from this man. And if you look at him, since Davante Adams left the team, he's got an 8.1 utilization score, which in the range of outcomes with that score comes quite a few wide receiver one finishes, but mostly wide receiver twos. And that's where we've been. This guy's hardly leaving the field. He's got a 96% route participation, 29% target share without Davante Adams, 40% of the team's air yards, end zone targets, 38% of the targets in the end zone going to Jakobi Meyers. So he's literally clicking on all cylinders when it comes to the utilization score. Yes, mostly we talk about Brock Bowers when we talk about the Raiders offense, and rightfully so to an extent. He's the rookie. He's the flashy new toy doing great things, potentially going to break Mike Ditka's rookie record as far as receiving yards per game, or receiving yards through 14 games. So we all love Brock Bowers, but man, Jakobi Meyers in his own right has been really good. And over this span, he's been incredibly consistent. He's got 1 wide receiver 1 finish, 5 wide receiver 2 finishes, 0 wide receiver 3. He has given you 2 wide receiver 4 finishes, guys. And that may sound bad, but that's not a bad floor. When your wide receiver duds and they still give you a wide receiver 4 finish, 7 to 9 fantasy points, that means it didn't completely ruin your day. So Jakobi's been very consistent. It's amazing what a 29% target share can do, even in an offense that we're not particularly in love with. That's why there's still hope for Juwan Jennings, Ian, because that's the range that he's been. We just need Aiden O'Connell. Could you give us another 340 yards? Because that's how you unlock the wide receiver 1 upside. And this week, we have a pretty good matchup here against the Bucs, Freedman. They've given up the 10th biggest fantasy boost to opposing wide receivers, an additional 4.3 points per game to opposing wide receiver units. So it is a positive matchup. If Aiden O'Connell can get this thing into a shootout, we get that wide receiver 1 finish for sure. But I think you're at least getting a wide receiver 2 finish. So with 6 teams on bye, I don't mind him right there as a borderline wide receiver 1.
In a situation where with Scott Turner as the play caller, Meyers has gotten 32 targets in 3 games. Great matchup against the Bucs, who are number 29 in defensive dropback EPA. What are your thoughts on Meyers for this week?
Since he returned from injury, wide receiver 17 in PPR points, and that's ahead of guys like Davante Adams, A.J. Brown, George Pickens, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., and yes, even Malik Neighbors as well. So while it does feel a little bit wonky, I agree, guys, to have him in that wide receiver 1 range. He's pretty much been that for the better part of the last, month and a half anyway. So I think we're just finally catching up to it. So my wide receiver 13 on the week, and just what Dwayne said, man, so consistent. 86 targets this year, guys. 0 drops for Jakobi Meyers. Only Trey McBride with 92 has more. But, no receiving touchdowns for Trey. That really sucks. So, yeah, Jakobi Meyers, fit him into those lineups.
All right, let's get to the sicko start. And, fellas, this really is sick. I have to say, even for you guys, this is disgusting. Nick Westbrook-Akine of the Titans going against the Jags. I don't really even want to talk about this, but the outline says I must. Dwain, talk to me about this guy that has 20 receptions for the year. Yeah, let's talk about him.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it either. Can I just pitch it to Ian? He is closer to being Nick Westbrook-Akine's agent. I've been more of the antagonist in this argument. Look, this guy's been on my Fugazi list for a month in the utilization report, which basically says, don't buy it, guys. Fool's gold. Don't be in on it. You just want to keep, fine. He's going to score that touchdown. He doesn't need to be in your lineup. Well, I did write last week in the utilization report, there are 2 ways in which Nick Westbrook-Akine could get off the Fugazi list. One is he improves his utilization score to a range where we could think that, okay, he's actually a viable fantasy option in the right situations. Or number 2 is just don't catch a touchdown, so I don't have to talk about it anymore. Well, he caught another touchdown, but as I looked into it, Freedman, now looking at the last 4 weeks, he has a 22% target share, 19% target share over that stretch, which puts you in wide receiver 3 territory. You look at his utilization score, even more importantly, 6.2. That can make you a boom bust wide receiver 4, borderline wide receiver 3. You mentioned it many times. We've got 6 teams on bye, and we're playing the Jaguars. Okay, so we're giving you the Will Levis, Nick Westbrook-Akine stack here in the sicko calls. What in the world could go wrong? And I will say, I'm okay if this breaks me. I'm okay if he goes for a complete dud and I can just be done with this. Either way, I'm fine, but I just wanted to tempt the gods, and I had to put Nick Westbrook-Ikhine into the sicko starts.
Yeah, either way you win, because if he goes off, you got it right. If he doesn't go off, we don't have to talk about him again. But we are going to talk about tight ends. Rough situation with 6 teams on bye at tight ends. The 12 that we have right now in our consensus rankings at FantasyLife, Brock Bowers, obviously locked in at number 1 for eternity at this point. Trey McBride, number 2, Kittle, Kelsey, Jonnu Smith, and David Njoku in 3 through 6. And then rounding out the top 12, we have Cade Otton, Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, Will Disley, and Tucker Kraft. Our sicko start not included in that list is Juwan Johnson, who could have a pretty big run out with all of the wide receivers injured for the Saints. And then, of course, Taysom Hill out for the season on IR with the knee injury. Presumably that means Juwan Johnson could be in line for a lot of usage. Dwain, talk about Juwan Johnson going against the Giants.
Yeah, Juwan Johnson's only in 3% of lineups on Yahoo, and probably rightfully so, guys. He's available in 94% of leagues, though. That's the big thing. If you are one of these fantasy managers that's really hurting due to the bye weeks, I do think because of the things that you just said, Juwan Johnson could have a good run out starting this weekend. We don't have Taysom Hill, gone for the season. Chris Olave is still on IR. Marquez Valdez-Scantling not earning a lot of targets, catching magic touchdowns, much like Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, more of a fugazi in my opinion. So that leaves one guy that's kind of, been able to do something in the passing game in the past outside of Alvin Kamara, who's obviously going to get peppered with targets, and that's Juwan Johnson. So they're letting him play some wide receiver. They're putting him in the slot. He's going to play in line. I think that we could see Juwan Johnson like at an 85-90% route participation this weekend. That alone, honestly, puts him as a borderline tight end 1. Historically, tight ends that have had over an 80% route participation, just saying you won the job for your team, has been good enough to make you a borderline tight end 1. Doesn't mean you're going to be it next year. They could find a better option than you, but if you're getting it in the season, it's historically been a pretty good mark to be at, and Juwan Johnson has that last weekend. And this is with Taysom Hill getting hurt in the game. He got to 79% of the routes. He had a 19% target share to lead the team outside of Kamara, 21% of the team's air yards. So that is a 7.1 utilization score, and that puts you in low-end tight end 1 range. I still have him as a high-end tight end 2, borderline tight end 1 this weekend. But I will say this, Freedman, I would start Juwan Johnson over Kyle Pitts. There's a lot. I think he's in the same mix. Like, we like Tucker Kraft's offense better. We like TJ Hawkinson's offense better. I think you could make the argument that Juwan Johnson's, his volume is probably more predictable than either of those guys. We don't love the offense, but if we're just talking about a floor here, I think Juwan Johnson's floor is probably better than those 2 players. So I think he's right there in that mix.
All right. Agree. Sad state of affairs for the tight end position. Let's close out the show with some rankings and mismatches, looking at the places where we have some discrepancy in our consensus rankings amongst the different rankers. And let's start with Patrick Mahomes. Maybe the best quarterback in the league, but definitely not the best fantasy quarterback. This week, Ian, you have him at number 6. Dwain, you have him at QB 13. Ian, explain yourself.
I think Dwayne should have to explain himself, Freeman. You have him QB8. Walls has him QB7. The guy's been top 11 3 of the last 5 weeks. Since they got Hopkins, top 5 in passing yards, top 5 in passing touchdowns. Only the Bengals have a higher dropback rate over expected. Matchup isn't great, but it's Patrick Mahomes. And yes, I was down to downgrade the guy after the first 6 or 7 weeks of the year, but I think we've seen a good enough sample, since then to go ahead and get him back up there, especially with the buys as a recommended start. So over guys like Brock Purdy and stuff, yes, give me probably still the best quarterback on the planet. So Dwayne, you explain yourself.
Yeah, man, with Patrick Mahomes, so when I'm looking at recent trends and stuff like with Tua, it's like I see a reason for it, right? This doesn't always mean that it's right or it's predicted, but it's like, okay, they've found the counterpunch with actual weapons like Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane, and you still got Tyreek Hill and you still got Jalen Waddle if defenses decide to take those other 2 guys away. For me with the Chiefs, it's pretty simple. Like, take away Travis Kelce and just let the chips fall where they may. And that can still be a major problem for Patrick Mahomes. So when I look at the Chiefs offense, honestly, I still lean into what we've seen for the season probably being the better indicator of where this team is, not just the last 4 weeks. You could argue, Ian, like on your side, DeAndre Hopkins, right, is a new player in the mix, but they don't even use him all the time. The guy's like 50 to 60% route participation. I wish they would use him more. I think it would be better for the offense. Maybe Pacheco can give him a little bit of a spark, but I mean, these are the finishes for Mahomes: 13, 14, 16, 16, 19, 16, 15, 5, 10, 16. He did get the 2 in week 12 and then 19 last weekend. So like, I just think he's a borderline QB1. I'm not going to argue if somebody wants to rank him as like 9 or 10. I honestly don't even have a big argument with you guys having him, as far ahead of him, as far ahead versus where I'm at. There's a pretty big tier there. It's got like Russell Wilson, it's got Jared Goff. It's kind of pick your, poison type of situation. They all have warts. They all have things that could go well for them. I tend to lean more into the offenses that I like the playmakers more whenever I've seen this big of a body of work like what we've seen from Mahomes. But, I don't have a major complaint with you guys having him more like 7 or 8.
All right, the next mismatch that we have on Thursday Night Football, Jahmyr Gibbs. Ian, you have him at RB11, near the bottom of the RB1 ranks. Dwain, you're a little more middle of the road at RB8. Ian, what makes you downgrade Jahmyr Gibbs this week?
Look, you're starting him regardless of if I have him RB11 or RB1, but how many more weeks do we have to go where we just still rank David Montgomery behind this guy? It's not like Gibbs has a bigger receiving role, guys, on the season. 28 catches for 282 yards for Gibbs. DeMont, 27 for 277, all right? He just got out-touched 24-11 last week and then gave away the team's plans on freaking social media. Dan Campbell didn't sound very happy after it happened. He can say it's not a big deal, but I just think it's a situation where we're continuing to give Gibbs the benefit of the doubt as a better real-life player, which I don't disagree with. But, guys, we're playing fantasy football, and we see time and time again that David Montgomery is going to be the Lions' featured back that they want to give the ball to just a little bit more often. So, again, you're starting both these guys regardless. But, Dwain, again, why are we still ranking Gibbs ahead of DeMont?
Because he is the better player. He's averaging 17.8 fantasy points per game versus 16.3 for David Montgomery. We like them both. You're starting them both. But if one of these guys is going to absolutely just obliterate the slate, I'm still putting the bet on the guy that can hit the home run at the drop of a hat. Does it always play out that way? No. But again, this is not a knock against David Montgomery. I think we all have him right there as a borderline running back 1 this weekend. I think the rankers have done a better job recently. And Freedman, you were on David Montgomery in the preseason. I remember when we shot our preseason shows up in New York, David Montgomery was one of your favorite players in fantasy this year. So I know you're on board. So this definitely isn't a knock on my part against David Montgomery. But I mean, are you really telling me, Ian, if you had to choose week in and week out which guy you're going to start between Gibbs and Montgomery, and you had to make that decision every week, you're going to pick Monty?
One guy's getting twice as many touches as the other guys, Dwayne. That's all I'm saying.
One guy scoring more fantasy points.
Sometimes. Right. How'd it go last week?
Right. Talking about scoring fantasy points, Tyreek Hill has not scored nearly as many fantasy points as anyone would have wanted. Ian, you still have him ranked wide receiver 10. Dwain, wide receiver 19. This discrepancy we must solve by talking about it. I would say we could solve the discrepancy by having you guys arm wrestle, but instead we'll just talk about it. Dwain, wide receiver 19. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, again, this is Tyreek Hill. I like Tua. So the question is, can they really get Tyreek Hill involved? Defenses, and you guys saw it last week in the Island game, they're doubling these wide receivers. And they're basically saying, we will allow Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane to beat us. And so far, defenses haven't changed their mind on that. Now, that trend has been going on for 5 weeks now. Ian and I talk a lot about this on the Sunday night recaps. We will see this in fantasy, where for a 4 or 5 game stretch, you have a player that's really hot. And then what happens? Defensive coordinators start seeing that player on all the film work, because typically teams are studying 3 to 4 weeks for the majority of how they're planning for their opponents. They're still looking further back for little wrinkles and things like that and how teams may set up play call sequencing. But as far as the guys that are getting targeted the most, you're going to see Jonnu Smith's name. That's got to be popping up now for defensive coordinators. So I still like Tyreek Hill. But at what point will these other teams decide they're not going to double him all the time? I mean, this is the lowest target share we've seen for Tyreek Hill since he's joined the Dolphins. So he's a guy that's, again, like Ian said about Jahmyr Gibbs versus Montgomery, you're starting these players, especially with 6 teams on bye. You're starting Tyreek Hill. I just don't look at him the same way I used to. I have him as a mid-range wide receiver 2. That's about where he is this week. The matchup against the Jets, it hasn't been as much of a big deal, to Ian's point, all the way back to week 6, but still on the season, like against the wide receivers, they've been better. They've struggled more against the interior players. So I think if there's guys that struggle in this game, I would have to lean to it being Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, not as much the guys that they're getting the stuff underneath to, which is still Jonnu and Achane. So starting Tyreek Hill, just, man, it's a sad day. This was a guy that we thought would be a top 3 wide receiver. Having to talk to him about him as a wide receiver 2 at all is pretty sad.
Ian, tell me why Dwain is wrong.
You can go in if you want, Freedman. You have him wide receiver 14, a little bit closer to your boy than Dwain anyway. But look, Dwain said himself all the good things about this Dolphins passing game. So yes, Tyreek not getting those 15 plus targets, not looking like the same player, playing through some injuries and all that. I get it, not ranked top 5 for a reason. But when I'm forced to look at Tyreek versus guys like Juwan Jennings, DK Metcalf, and Calvin Ridley, I don't think those guys are inherently better football players than Tyreek at this point. So if the volume is similar, give me the guy with, again, what has been a good matchup for the better part of the last 2 months and an offense that we trust more. So Tyreek Hill, keep him in those lineups.
All right, and final guy to look at with the mismatches, Elijah Moore. I have him all the way at wide receiver 43. Ian, you have him at wide receiver 36. The pessimistic case I'll make, it's an outdoor game, cold weather, AFC North rematch. These games just tend to be rock fights, a tough matchup going against a good Steelers secondary. And I just think this Browns offense rather, is due for some regression. Like Jameis Winston, I know it's fun watching him throw the ball and throw pick sixes and pray to the Lord not to throw any more pick sixes and then just go out there and throw it out deep again. But it's just like he can't continue to rack up this much passing yardage. I think that offense will regress a little bit. And then even if Cedric Tillman doesn't return, which I think there's a chance he returns, but even if he doesn't return at best, Elijah Moore is the number 3 pass catcher in an offense that I think is going to be challenged this week. So just a little bit more pessimistic. And he's kind of on that borderline of, do you or don't you start him this week? And I'm probably not starting him. Ian, based on the ranking, it feels like decent chance you would be starting him. Talk to me about the bull case with Elijah Moore.
Your rankings also still have Cedric Tillman in, and I am assuming out. So I think we'd be a little bit closer if and when that does come to fruition, Mr. Freedman. But yeah, I mean, look, we can say Jameis is going to regress, but I think sometimes we like to use that as a caveat for just saying, hey, these guys are playing so freaking well and putting up so many yards right now. How can they possibly keep that going? So no, I don't think Jameis is going to keep averaging 330 yards per start or whatever it is he's getting this year. But man, who's the other leader behind him? Burrow at like 278 right now. Also, Burrow didn't have that much of a problem going up against, Joey Porter and company last week. So don't think Elijah Moore is Jamar Chase or T. Higgins out there. But Freedman, I remember back in 2019, man, where I tried my hardest to try to trust what I found out about these wide receivers. And I did not trust Brashad Perryman to keep things going just because Jameis was under center. And I took a big fat L for weeks on end at the stretch end of that season. So I'm not doing that right now. If you need a flex, I do think Elijah Moore can get there on hot, nasty, badass volume.
All right. I mean, I can't really disagree with that logic, especially when you start quoting a movie with Will Ferrell. All right, that is going to do it for the Week 14 Fantasy Life Rankings episode. Be sure to catch tomorrow's show as well as the Sunday morning Start Sit Q&A live stream that I do every week with Chris Allen. For Ian and Dwain, I'm Matt Freedman, and we will see you next episode.